Honorable members, order.
Switch on the microphone. Switch on the microphone. We're rising on a point of order.
On a point of order.
The microphones must be on.
Welcome to Politics Unmuted, where our microphones are never muted and we turn up the volume on all things political. I'm Kanita Hunter, the politics editor for News 24.
I'm Liz Gatandwa, News 24's political reporter.
Hi guys, I'm Peter Du Toit. I'm assistant editor for In-Depth News at News 24.
Today we are recording a bit differently, guys. I'm here in Mozambique for the week. The weather is just phenomenal where I am. Peter, you at the News 24 Joburg office?
Unfortunately, I'm at the mothership in Joburg, where it's still COVID lockdown. The building is still very much empty, and it's a shell of the normally busy offices that we've come to know. But Joburg's weather is still lovely.
Ah, that's great. Liz, you at home?
Hi Q, yes, I am at home. I'm in the comfort of my home. I'm relaxed. I have my laptop in hand and ready to go.
That's awesome, guys. It's always exciting. I think Wednesdays is always a highlight for of my week because we always have the most fascinating discussions. We'll kick off this week around self-proclaimed prophet Shepherd Bushi and his wife, who've escaped from South Africa. But more than anything, it's what does this debacle teach us about the country that we live in? I also want to talk about the drama that unfolded this week at the Zondo Commission, with former President Jacob Zuma applying for Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo to recuse himself. But let's kick it off with the Bushidos. Liz, if this was a movie script, it would be rejected, I think, because it's just too dramatic.
I watched it in disbelief, to be honest. Wasn't really involved in it. And, you know, I was happy to be watching it not working and not being in the field. But it was somewhat of a wonder. I mean, there's so many details that really just boggle the mind, from him receiving a bail to him leaving the country, escaping with his wife, his very problematic press conference in Malawi, the president of Malawi leaving the very same day, the conspiracy theories about the president, ushering him away, taking him away from South African authority, and also the South African authorities' responsibility. Well, as much as it really is quite comical, but there's huge implications around South Africa and its laws, South Africa and its extradition treaties with some of the African countries. And it also, it brought back memories for a lot of people on what happened in 2015. You remember very well, Kanita.
Absolutely. With Omar al-Bashir, we've seen it with Grace Mugabe as well. But let's just take a step back, Liz. So Shepherd Bushi is obviously a self-proclaimed prophet. He and his wife Mary, they are Malawian originally. They head a church called the Enlightened Christian Gathering, ECG. They've obviously been on the radar of law enforcement. They were arrested on fraud, theft, and money laundering charges with three other co-accused. And this is in connection with an investment scheme that people put their money into this church, and a lot of that money sort of disappeared. It's said to be around 102 million rand. Now, the thing is, Peter, is that we are not short of these bogus prophets here in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
This is not the first one, right?
No, it's not. Look, religion is a big business, isn't it? I mean, if you drive around downtown Joburg, if you drive around Pretoria, they, especially in the inner city and in Pretoria on the outskirts, on the eastern side of Pretoria, there are all manner of different sorts of churches, all manner of revival churches, and what seems like fly-by-night institutions, which really speaks to people's desire to belong to a religion or a community or whatever the case may be. And unfortunately, what we've seen proliferate not only in this country but definitely in the United States, in Europe, and elsewhere, Australia as well, is that people often or sometimes do get taken for a ride by self-proclaimed prophets. And I think let's just put a stake in the sand and say that News 24 always reported that Bushiri is a self-proclaimed prophet. It's so complicated with religion, but he's a self-proclaimed prophet, and he spoke to people's fears, I suppose. He spoke to people's desire to belong and to believe in a higher being. Now, that's a whole different debate, I think, but what we have seen is a proliferation of churches, of institutions, of fly-by-night pop-up churches who take people's money and run, Juanita. That's concerning, and we know that the Commission on Religious and Language Rights have started looking at this. It's difficult. You don't want to register churches, and once you go down that route, that's a slippery slope too. But unfortunately, we do see unscrupulous pastors and religious men of the cloth who aren't there to save people's souls, as it were, but are actually there to pickpocket them.
And Liz, when Bushiri was arrested in October and appeared in court subsequently, you saw this immense following outside of the court. Obviously, you knew that his services were well attended and he has a great amount of support. But I was not expecting what I saw outside the Pretoria Magistrates Court when he appeared in October.
Kanita, having served as a general reporter for quite a number of years before I came into politics, I remember when the CRL Commission first started with its inquiry into how it can regulate churches. So many of these big names, which if you look at them, they seem to have some affiliation with some political parties. Bushiri, for instance, if you remember the video, Naledi Chirwa from the EFF took her thanking Bushiri. He's also been seen in mingling with the EFF leadership as high up as Julius Malema. That is the problem with the machinery of churches, is that they have an immense support. And that support translates to how they can somehow co-opt the political parties. I mean, Kanita Q, you've seen so many times where the presidents and big political players go to these churches and they are surrounded by these church leaders who pray for them. And, it's become a way for them to garner support.
Church leaders need politicians for legitimacy, and then politicians need church leaders for public support, for money, for financing, that kind of thing.
That's correct. And if you see the kind of resistance, I'm not sure if you're aware, Peter, or if you were following the CRL Commission, if you saw the resistance within the leadership of the churches, the clandestine churches, charismatic churches, when the CRL wanted to open their books, it was clear that, there is some level of, I know that I will be crucified for this, but there's some level of corruption within the church organizations and the church system itself. And that goes back to the lockdown regulations, for instance, how the churches were, strong-arming government. It gives you an idea of the power that they wield in politics. Maybe you guys might expand.
No, look, Liz, first of all, no one's crucifying anyone on this program. I think let's stay away from medieval violence. But look, I think politicians have in the past, especially in this country, pre-94 and post-94, very cynically exploited the relationship between religious organizations and their flocks. I remember vividly in 2009, I followed Jacob Zuma around ahead of the general election in Northwest and Limpopo and in Mpumalanga. And the first stop was always religious leaders who stopped to pray for the persecuted leader of the ANC. And he was a choir boy. He was a church choir boy when he went to those churches and fell on his knees and hands on his head and shoulders. And, it just goes to show that the constituency of churches, the constituency of the religious community in this country, as we saw in the US election that's just gone past. It's this country, as the US and Europe and other countries, is inherently very conservative. Many people identify with churches, and politicians, very cynically, as I've said, see churches as a way to get access to voting fodder. So what happened with Bushiri? Look, Juanita, in the beginning, you said it exposed quite a number of things, and I suppose we need to get to that as well. Our porous borders, the fact that Department of Home Affairs can't keep people in or out. The decision to give him bail, was that the right or the wrong one? And then obviously the criminal justice system. Why weren't they able to keep tabs on someone like this who not only was feared to be a flight risk, but proved to be a flight risk? But just to get back to my original point, politicians cynically exploit church-going and religious people in this country. But that happens all over the world. It's not new. It's not unique to us.
So there's a template to this, right? It almost feels like there is when it comes to, the ostentatious, sort of almost, scammerish, if that's a word, as nature of these self-proclaimed prophets with their big delegations, with their fast cars, etc. And there's almost always, the stories and the accusations of being swindled out of money by devout worshippers. And that's what obviously happened in the case of Shepherd Bushiri, where he's now, facing charges around money laundering, fraud, and corruption. But the reality of it is that he went through the criminal justice system, and he was presented to the magistrate's court, and it was the issue of bail. And it was exposed at the time that he had multiple passports, that he entered South Africa under dodgy circumstances, and yet he was still given bail of 200,000 rand, him and his wife, Mary. I mean, how in 2020 are we still having these discussions around bail, and what does it mean, and how can it be done more equitably?
I'm at a loss, Kanisa. I mean, to be fair, the Bushiri story was not in my radar initially. But, considering the evidence, the mounting evidence against him, the fact that he wasn't even documented in South Africa, the allegations or the case against him in terms of the monies that have been going to and fro in his church, it boggled my mind to find out that the magistrate in charge of this case decided, even with the NPA appealing to the judge not to give him any leniency in terms of bail, that he received bail. The conditions were strict, but nonetheless, this is a man with influence outside of the country. So it wasn't that much of a surprise, given that we have this issue of our porous borders, that he would be able to escape so easily. The issue, which has been said a lot by some of my peers, is that the problem is that, to find out from the man himself that he's left South Africa, tells you something about the cracks in our systems.
So let's just take it back a little bit. So his bail conditions were the fact that he obviously handed over his passports. He was supposed to report to police station every Monday and every Friday. He was also told not to speak to any witnesses. That's what was his bail conditions, right? And then on Friday, this last Friday, he was meant to report to a police station. He did not show up. He was not at his home, and that's when only now do we come to know that Hawks officials started becoming panicky. And then there was the suspicion that he would have been in the delegation of the president of Malawi, who paid a working visit to President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday on his return from Pretoria Waterkloof Air Force Base to Lilongwe. So there was the suspicion that he could have been in this delegation, especially since President Lazarus Chakwera arrived with about 26 people in his delegation and wanted to leave with about 64. And so that already raised a lot of eyebrows within South African law enforcement, they decided to go and verify every single person, causing some sort of diplomatic tension, particularly because now President Chakwera was basically sitting in his plane while Hawks officials were trying to verify every single person on board. But the reality of it is that by the time they were alerted, it seems now that Bushiri and his wife had already escaped South Africa. And when you ask Home Affairs, how does this happen? It's so bizarre to me, Peter, that Aaron Motsoaledi says, no, Bushiri was not in our care. Bushiri was in the care of law enforcement. We were not surveilling him. He didn't pass lawfully through our borders. And, oh, well, the issue of porous borders is a long-standing issue. So we don't have anything to do with this. It's just completely bizarre.
Look, it is bizarre. It's a crazy story, and I'd love to hear how Bushiri escaped. I think that's what we all want to find out. How did he actually? I mean, it's quite a distance to travel from this country to where he lives outside Lilongwe. So I'd love to get the backstory to that.
I don't think it's that crazy, Peter, in the sense that literally these things happen on a daily basis through Beitbridge, through
Well, yes.
So it really isn't that, like, I don't even think it's an expensive feat. I think a few $100 can push you through the border.
So you think it'll be a boring movie then?
That part of it, the rest of it, I mean, we're still getting to the exciting bits.
But your team, Konita, has written extensively about the issues on the border between South Africa and Zimbabwe over the last couple of months, where the fence there is almost non-existent in some places, and there's been enormous issues around the procurement of a new fence or to repair the fence. So border control, incidentally, has been an issue since 1994. I remember shortly after Nelson Mandela became president, he took down the border between South Africa and Mozambique, running through the Kruger National Park, because there were human rights issues around the border being electrified. That was repaired a couple of years after that. But budgeting issues for Home Affairs to secure the borders has been an issue over the last 20 years. And it is something that we have not yet gotten to grips with. Rather, we know how many Zimbabwean expatriates are in this country and the reasons why they come to this country, and how easy it is for them to come to this country. Of course, it presents some serious security issues to us. We know what's happening in the northern parts of the country that you find yourself in at the moment, Konita. So we need effective border control. We need to know who comes in and goes out of the country, and that's a major issue for Aaron Motsoaledi, the Minister of Home Affairs, who doesn't seem to be able to get to grips with it.
Yeah, sorry to interject, but I feel like what Aaron Motsoaledi represents is government departments and government agencies that work in silos, and they just this is not our problem. We do what we need to do. And so the Hawks, for example, will say the same thing, that we needed him to appear, before the police station on Friday. We don't handle borders, and so him fleeing is not our concern. Then you have the same thing with international relations versus defense. International relations says we only deal with the state visit. We don't deal with diplomatic issues. We don't deal with security related. So it's almost like all South African agencies are pointing fingers at each other with no real effort to understand what actually happened. How was he able to flee the country and then issue a statement on Saturday, hold a media broadcast on Saturday evening, literally making demands to the South African government?
It made a mockery, I thought, of our law enforcement agencies, Liz and Konita. I thought it made a mockery of border management control agencies. It showed us up again for the umpteenth time.
Yeah.
And this time, it's quite embarrassing. The rest of Africa looking at us and saying, look, you can't even control someone that you've already arrested.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, I keep going back to that press conference or even that statement that he released prior to that. The fact that we were not aware from our officials who had an idea, who knew exactly where they knew that he had escaped by then, but they were still mum about it, and we had to be shown off again. It speaks to the inadequacies of our government, and it speaks to. I'm at a loss, Kanita. I really feel like Even listening to Aaron Mutsualedi in Parliament as he tried to explain his role, his department, saying that there's going to be consequence for some officials, but that's not enough. That's not what we need. And you are right in saying that everyone seems to be working in a silo. There's no cohesiveness in these departments, and that's a huge problem. That it's a problem that has existed for a number of years in government and in departments and in our cabinet.
As we speak now, Liz, the Bushidis have handed themselves over to the police in Malawi. They've also been 2 warrants of arrest issued in Pretoria for him. And South Africa said they're going to begin the process to extradite him to come and face the charges. His bail has been revoked. But obviously, we know that these processes take a long time. And there's also one other thing before we move on to the other topic, is that South Africa doesn't have good historic relations with Malawi. So for us to think that the Malawian government is going to bend over backwards to bring Bushiri back so that we can make him stand trial in South Africa, I think we'll be a little bit misplaced to think that. And I also think that he enjoys a lot of support very high up in Malawi, and we can't underestimate that. There was a reason why he fled South Africa for Malawi, and I think that it's something to watch.
Juanita, look, I think there are dangers lurk in whatever processes are going to be followed now. And I'm not that au fait with our relations with our historical relations with Malawi, but it might very well turn out that Malawi says, look, given what is happening or has happened in South Africa in regards to xenophobic violence or, state capture and the state of your judicial system or whatever the case may be, they can say, look, we're not going to extradite him to South Africa because of reason X, Y, Z. And that's going to reflect very badly on South Africa. So, Malawi and Prophet Bushiri to a lesser extent has us by the short and curlies at the moment.
Absolutely, absolutely. Moving on to our second topic, as someone who was trying to hold the State Capture Commission, the Zondo Commission of Inquiry investigating state capture by the short and curlies is former President Jacob Zuma, because they obviously attempted this week. He was meant to answer questions on Monday. He was summoned to appear before the Zondo Commission, and they then decided to apply for Justice Raymond Zondo to recuse himself. It's always fascinating. I find Muzi Sigakani quite fascinating to listen to generally, but I really just could not understand why they would think that this attempt, that we won't see through this attempt to have Justice Zondo be seen as this biased individual. Liz?
I beg to differ, Kanita. I think this is a stalling tactic. I think he knows the president, the former president, that is, he knows that this won't hold any water. He doesn't have any strong argument against the Zondo recusal. I think this is just a stalling tactic. I think it's a way for him to, just like he has been doing with his corruption case in Pietermaritzburg, he has been stalling. The man who allegedly wants his day in court, I don't see him with his legal team and they busy concocting these legal arguments that they know that it has any merit. And my conspiracy is that he's waiting until the Zondo Commission and term ends next year, March. That's what my theory is.
And the court has obviously said that they won't extend the deadline for the Zondo Commission. So, Justice Zondo and the team there have so much of work to do. So this is just a matter of stalling. I get you 100% on that. And the other thing is that a lot of what has been raised in terms of the basis for the recusal is just smoke and mirrors. The fact that Justice Zondo says, I'm not your friend. I saw you on one or two occasions. Yes, I probably had a child with your now estranged sister-in-law, because, former President Jacob Zuma is no longer with his wife, Tubega, in the 90s. Subsequent to that, he was appointed deputy chief, first a judge, a justice, and then a deputy chief justice. President Zuma signed off after Chief Justice Mogoeng recommended that he head this commission. And so there's all of this drama, the fact that him being kind to witnesses has been the subject of the basis for their asking for recusal. For me, it's completely laughable. But at what point do we see through this, Peter, and we say, we've been through this before? Stalingrad legal strategy, we've seen it, we've been through it.
Yeah.
Can't play us this way.
I think anyone who has been following the travails of Jacob Zuma over the last 10 years, even if it is just in passing, can see what's going on here. And Liz is absolutely right. It's a stalling tactic. Look, there's absolutely no legal basis in my mind. And I've listened to the arguments from Musi Sekakane and listened to Paul Pretorius rebut those. And we've all watched this commission very closely since it came into being in October 2018. There's no legal basis. And look, what was striking to me listening to Musi Sekakane was a couple of times where he said, Deputy Chief Justice, it's not you. I'm very concerned about Advocate Pretorius. You are fine. Then why does he want the Deputy Chief Justice to recuse himself if his actual concern is with Paul Pretorius? And I think there's a massive misconception out there in the public as well that this is not a court of law. This is not a court of law where there's an adversarial approach, where the court, where you've got two sides fighting. The commission is the Deputy Chief Justice, is the judge. He is the commission. His job is to look for evidence and to delve deep into whatever is presented in front of him. That's his job. Then he draws up a report. That report goes to the president, and the president decides what to do with that, or the National Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks. That's how it works. So Jacob Zuma has always said, I want my day in court. Well, the last thing that he actually wants is his day in court, and the last thing he actually wants is some form of justice for himself. And he'll try everything to try and stop that. And we've seen that this week. I think, I hope for the day that Zuma gets his comeuppance.
There was an indication by Musi Sekakane that if he doesn't get his way, if former President Jacob Zuma doesn't get his way and Zondo doesn't recuse himself, then he will do probably what Dudu Myeni did, was just, invoke their right to remain silent out of fear of incriminating themselves, which is absolute nonsense because they have so much to account for. They've been implicated so much in the State Capture Commission. In fact, they probably could assist the work of the State Capture Commission with all these different theories that they've been, banding about for so long. And the reality of it is that it risks undermining. I digress for a second, but Musi Sekakane went through this soliloquy where he spoke about how there's
what a beautiful word, Juanita. Say it again.
Soliloquy.
Please educate us.
where he went through this narrative of how there's no legal term called state capture, right? And that's something Jacob Zuma, Liz, you've heard this a million times, where he's like, is the judiciary captured? Is Parliament captured? Then why do you say state captures?
I remember when he said this for the first time. I think it was in Mtata during the NBZ campaign. Yeah.
I think it was 2016 where he really went to town with this, and everywhere we'd go covering former President Zuma, he'd say this. But the point is that in 2020, despite everything we've seen, there's still this political dispute that state capture is a myth. And I think maybe, Peter, you can disagree with me or come in here, but I think that maybe us focusing on the issue of state capture as a political theatrical sort of drama, more than this is an organized crime syndicate, has allowed them to sort of play politics when this is in fact just a serious band of looters and thieves.
Juanita, two things. One is that we shouldn't allow ourselves to be hoodwinked or dragged off course, or our attention being diverted by this kind of talk, is my opinion. I think we should keep our eye on the ball, which is that there was an organized, very systematic and very effective attempt to capture the state on behalf of private criminal and political interests. There have been academic studies which have done enormous work to try and explain this phenomenon and have tried to explain it along academic terms. You think of the big study that was done by the University of Witwatersrand in 2018, I think. So there have been a number of academic studies looking at this. So I think, yes, there will be a lot of noise. We spoke about previously. We spoke about the political noise around Ace Magashule and the way that they tried to muddy the waters. We shouldn't be swayed. I think state capture is a real thing. It did happen. We saw the ravages of state capture unfold over a good couple of years. So if they don't agree with the definition, I mean that's kind of academic to me. Like you say, it was a bunch of looters who targeted the fiscus, who in effect hobbled the state's ability to deliver services to the people who need it most, and that should be the focus.
Liz, your final thoughts?
Well, I agree with Peter, and what boggles the mind is that the man himself was in charge of ensuring that there is a state capture commission, willingly or not. But the reality is, at this point, I don't even care whether I see him in jail or not. It's not about that to me. He's a 70-something-year-old man. I couldn't care less. It's more about accountability for me, and it's just to close the gaps in the South African systems, to ensure that we don't have this kind of patronage network again. It's careless. It's callous how he has conducted himself as a former president, and to think that he is actually even entertaining that kind of testimony that we saw from Dudu Muyineni, it's a slap in the face of South Africans.
Well, obviously, this is not the end of it, and I think we'll be talking about the state capture commission for a very long time. Peter, your final words?
Look, I can't wait to see him go to jail. I think he did enormous damage. I think he betrayed so many people. He betrayed the trust of his supporters, of his party, of the country, of the constitution. So yes, accountability needs to be exacted. And the one thing, Juanita, I think courts have in recent times grown tired of Zuma's attempts to throw in roadblocks ahead of the train of justice, as it were. And we've seen a couple of courts throw out applications. We've seen a couple of cost orders against them, and I think we're going to see more of that.
Absolutely, and I think that we have a long way to go to fix our country and its law enforcement from what we learn as a result of the Bushi debacle, and obviously what is uncovered in state capture. That's all we have for you today from all of us at Politics Unmuted. Thanks for listening. This episode was produced by my colleague Catherine Rice. The music is courtesy of Getty Images and Epidemic Sound. And if you enjoy this episode, please subscribe and follow the hashtag Politics Unmuted.